Let me be direct with you. Let me cut straight through the noise because there is a conversation happening right now across every sports platform, every basketball forum, every barbershop debate in this country, and it deserves to be addressed with complete honesty and zero sugarcoating. LeBron James has just been eliminated from the playoffs again, and in the aftermath of that exit, two things are happening simultaneously. First, LeBron himself has admitted publicly that he simply does not know what his future looks like. Second, and this is the part that should genuinely concern anyone paying attention, the Los Angeles Lakers have not yet confirmed whether they even want him back.
With my future, I don't know, obviously. Obviously we're still fresh from, obviously losing, and I don't know. I don't know what the future holds for me, obviously, as it stands right now tonight. I got a lot of time. I'll sit back, like I think I said it last year after we lost, I think to Minnesota, to go back and recalibrate with my family and talk with them and spend some time with them. And then when the time comes, I obviously, you guys know what I decide to do.
That is not a rumor. That is not speculation manufactured for clicks. That is the reality sitting on the table right now.
So let us have the real conversation, because while LeBron's future remains uncertain, and while the possibility exists, however remote some may consider it, that he has played his final game in a Lakers uniform, the debate consuming every corner of basketball media is whether his time in Los Angeles should be classified as a success. And that question deserves a serious, honest, unflinching answer, not a promotional answer, not a narrative-driven answer designed to protect a legacy. An honest one. Now, LeBron himself views his Lakers tenure as a success. That much is obvious. That much was never in question. When has LeBron James ever looked at a chapter of his career and publicly declared it a failure? That is simply not in his nature, and frankly, it is not a reasonable expectation of any competitor. So his perspective, while noted, is not particularly illuminating here. What is illuminating and what is genuinely hard to sit through without your jaw dropping is the take put forward by one of the most prominent LeBron apologists in sports media today. The argument made was that LeBron's Lakers tenure was an absolute, unequivocal success. Full stop. No qualifications, no asterisks, no acknowledgement of context, just a blanket declaration that 8 years of Lakers basketball under LeBron James represents everything this franchise should have hoped for. And that take does not just miss the mark, it obliterates the mark entirely and lands somewhere in a completely different zip code. Here is where it gets particularly interesting, because the argument used to defend this position was a comparison. LeBron's Lakers tenure was stacked up against the tenures of Nikola Jokic with the Denver Nuggets and Giannis Antetokounmpo with the Milwaukee Bucks. Yeah, the logic, if you can call it that, was that when you look at finals appearances, championship titles, conference finals appearances, and regular season win percentages, the numbers are roughly comparable. And therefore, if you're going to call LeBron's Lakers run a disappointment, you have to apply that same label to Jokic's Nuggets and Giannis's Bucks. And since nobody is calling those situations failures, the argument goes, you cannot call LeBron's situation a failure either. Let that reasoning breathe for a moment. Really sit with it.
Is tenure a success?
Absolutely, unequivocally, yes. And this is where I think there is such a wild double standard for LeBron compared to other contemporary stars.
Because it is the kind of comparison that sounds superficially compelling until you actually examine what sits underneath it. And what sits underneath it is a mountain of context so significant, so fundamentally important to the entire conversation that ignoring it is not an oversight. It is a choice. We need to start with the teammates, because the teammates are everything in this discussion. They are the variable that makes every other statistical comparison between LeBron's Lakers and Jokic's Nuggets not just misleading, but intellectually dishonest. Let us look at the actual numbers. During LeBron James's 8-year tenure with the Lakers, his teammates accumulated 10 All-Star game appearances, All-NBA selections, or All-NBA defensive team selections combined. 10. in 8 years. That is a staggering level of supporting talent surrounding the self-proclaimed greatest player of all time on the most storied franchise in the history of professional basketball. Now contrast that with what Nikola Jokic has had around him in Denver. Over 11 years, Jokic's teammates have accumulated 2 such designations, 2 in 11 years. And here is the detail that makes it even more striking. Both of those 2 designations came in Jokic's 11th season, with Jamal Murray earning an All-NBA third-team selection this year. Which means that for the first 10 years of Jokic's time in Denver, if you set aside that recent recognition, his teammates had produced exactly 0 All-Star or All-NBA caliber seasons by that standard. 0. And we are comparing these 2 situations as if the circumstances are remotely equivalent. We are drawing a straight line between what LeBron accomplished, surrounded by 10 elite-level seasonal performances from his teammates, and what Jokic accomplished, surrounded by essentially none, and then presenting it as evidence that the outcomes should be held to the same standard. That is not analysis. That is the complete abandonment of analysis. Now, let us talk specifically about the quality of the teammates themselves, because the raw numbers only tell part of the story. LeBron James has had Luka Doncic as a teammate in Los Angeles. Luka Doncic is a top 5 player in the entire league. He has earned multiple first-team All-NBA selections.
I mean, I'm not looking at, my year as a disappointment. That's for damn sure.
He is one of the most dominant offensive forces the sport has produced in a generation. That is not a complimentary player. That is a co-star of the absolute highest order, a player who on his own would be the unquestioned franchise centerpiece for the vast majority of teams in this league. LeBron has also had Anthony Davis. And before we discuss Anthony Davis's playoff performances with LeBron, understand that Davis was officially voted as one of the 75 greatest players in NBA history. That is the recognition bestowed upon him by the league itself, by historians and executives and former players who understand the sport at the deepest level. Anthony Davis is not a role player. He is not a solid complementary piece. He is a top 75 all-time talent, a player capable of dominating on both ends of the floor at an elite level when healthy and engaged. Now compare that to Nikola Jokic's best running mate over his 11 years in Denver. That distinction belongs to Jamal Murray. And to be clear, Jamal Murray is a good NBA player. He is a capable scorer and a legitimate playoff contributor on his best days. But his resume tells its own story. Murray is a career one-time All-Star across 9 years in the league. He has missed 2 complete playoff runs entirely, sitting on the sideline while Jokic carried the Nuggets without him. And in the playoff runs where Murray has been present and available over the last 3 seasons, he has averaged 21 points per game on 20 shots a night, shooting approximately 40% from the field, while providing perimeter defense that ranks among the weakest in the entire league at his position. Now set that next to what Anthony Davis delivered in his 4 postseason runs alongside LeBron. Davis averaged 25 points per game and 12 rebounds per game on 55% shooting across that stretch. He was playing at a level that deserved serious Defensive Player of the Year consideration. He was anchoring the Lakers defensively while producing offensively at a rate that most players could only dream about. There are levels to this comparison, serious, undeniable, quantifiable levels. And anyone who looks at these numbers and concludes the situations are equivalent is simply not engaging with the evidence in good faith. There is also a context that this entire debate refuses to properly address, and it is one of the most important contextual factors in the conversation. We are talking about the Los Angeles Lakers, not the Denver Nuggets, not the Milwaukee Bucks, the Los Angeles Lakers, the franchise with the most championships in the history of the sport alongside the Boston Celtics, the franchise of Jerry West and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Magic Johnson and Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. The franchise whose standard of success was set by dynasty, by dominance, by championships won not in spite of expectations, but because of them. When you arrive at the Los Angeles Lakers as the self-proclaimed greatest player of all time, the measuring stick is not the Denver Nuggets. It is not whether your conference finals appearances match someone who has spent his entire career in a mid-market without the resources or the expectations that come with the purple and gold. The measuring stick is the franchise's own history, and by that standard, the numbers become very difficult to defend. Let us go through them carefully and honestly. During LeBron's 8-year tenure in Los Angeles, the Lakers won 7 playoff series in total, 7 series wins in 8 years. Now here is the number that genuinely needs to sit with you. 4 of those 7 series victories came during a single postseason run, the 2020 championship season, which took place inside the NBA bubble following a nearly 5-month hiatus caused by a global pandemic. A championship won in an environment so unusual, so fundamentally different from the standard competitive conditions of professional basketball, that it has been viewed with skepticism and treated with heavy qualification by significant portions of the basketball community. Whether you personally accept that championship as fully legitimate or view it as carrying an asterisk is a separate conversation. But you cannot pretend the context does not exist. You cannot erase the pandemic shutdown, the bubble environment, and the unprecedented circumstances and then present that ring as a standard achievement. So if we set aside that 2020 championship and examine the remaining 7 years of LeBron's Lakers tenure independently, the record becomes genuinely indefensible for anyone trying to argue that this was a successful run by a meaningful standard. In those 7 seasons, the Lakers won a grand total of 3 playoff series. 3. 7 years, 3 series. And LeBron's individual playoff record with the Lakers, tallied honestly, stands at 16 wins and 26 losses when you exclude the bubble run. Even when you include every game from the Orlando bubble, the record sits at 32 wins and 31 losses, a barely above 500 playoff record spanning 8 years on the franchise he joined specifically because he believed he could win championships there. We need to stop and really absorb what those numbers represent. This is LeBron James. This is the player who spent his entire career demanding to be evaluated against the greatest to ever play this game. This is the player who orchestrated his team constructions and his roster decisions with deliberate, meticulous intentionality, surrounding himself with hand-picked teammates specifically chosen to maximize his championship opportunities. This is not a player who wandered into a difficult situation through no fault of his own and ground out results against impossible odds. This is a player who had significant influence over who he played with, who landed in one of the sport's most glamorous markets with one of its most powerful front offices, and who had at various points during his time there a top 75 all-time center and a top 5 league-wide point forward sharing the floor with him. And the output from that combination on that franchise over those 8 years is a playoff record that barely touches even and a legacy defined more by early exits and disappointing seasons than by the sustained excellence the situation demanded. Here is what truly crystallizes the problem with the argument that LeBron's Lakers tenure deserves to be defended as an unqualified success. The comparison to Jokic and Giannis does not exonerate LeBron. It actually does the opposite. What it does unintentionally and ironically is reveal just how little LeBron maximized his extraordinary circumstances. Jokic and Giannis built their results from the ground up in their respective cities without the ability to handpick their teammates or leverage franchise prestige to attract maximum talent. They worked within the constraints of their situations and produced comparable outcomes to what LeBron produced with dramatically superior resources and support. That is not a compliment to LeBron. That is the most damning possible indictment of his Lakers tenure dressed up as a defense of it. If you are going to tell me that Nikola Jokic, with 0 all-star caliber teammates for a decade, playing for an organization that does not carry the commercial and historical weight of the Lakers, produced roughly equivalent postseason results to LeBron James with 10 elite seasonal performances from his supporting cast surrounding him, then you are not defending LeBron's Lakers run. You are accidentally making the case that it was a colossal underperformance. The standard for the Los Angeles Lakers, with 2 players in the top tier of the league sharing the floor, is not 7 total playoff series wins over 8 years. It is not a barely above 500 playoff record, including a bubble championship that carries permanent asterisks in the minds of a large portion of the basketball community. The standard is sustained contention, sustained excellence, and championships won under normal competitive circumstances against the full weight of the sport's best teams in a real playoff environment. That standard was not met. By any honest accounting, it was not even approached in most of those 8 years. Now look, nobody is suggesting the Los Angeles Lakers should have been stripped of the 2020 championship or that LeBron's individual brilliance went unseen during his time there. He remained an elite player for much of that stretch, and his scoring, playmaking, and basketball intelligence never fully deserted him, regardless of the team's collective failures. That is real, and that is worth acknowledging. But individual excellence and franchise success are two entirely different conversations, and conflating them to protect a preferred narrative serves nobody. It certainly does not serve the fans who invested 8 years of emotional energy and financial support into a Lakers team that promised so much and delivered so little beyond that single extraordinary and context-heavy championship. The question being asked is whether LeBron's Lakers tenure was a success, and the answer, stripped of sentimentality, stripped of media narrative, stripped of the promotional machinery that has surrounded this player for 2 decades, is no. Not by the standard of the franchise, not by the standard LeBron himself established through his own words and his own career-long insistence on being measured against the greatest, not by the standard that should reasonably apply to a player of his stated ambitions, his extraordinary supporting cast, and his unparalleled resources and influence over his own competitive situation. Giannis, staying in Milwaukee through difficult seasons and producing comparable results, deserves respect because he did it without the leverage, without the hand-picked teammates, and without the commercial machinery of the NBA's most celebrated franchise behind him. Jokic doing it in Denver with nothing resembling elite supporting talent is one of the most remarkable, sustained individual performances in the history of the sport. LeBron doing it in Los Angeles with Anthony Davis and Luka Doncic and 10 combined All-Star and All-NBA caliber teammate seasons, and the full weight of the Lakers organization behind him should have produced something significantly greater than what the scoreboard actually recorded. It simply should have. The Lakers have not confirmed they want him back. LeBron himself admits he does not know what comes next. And as the basketball world debates his future and argues about his legacy in purple and gold, the honest answer to the question of whether this tenure succeeded is staring directly at everyone willing to look at the numbers without flinching. 32 and 31, including the bubble. 16 and 26 without it. 3 series wins in 7 non-bubble seasons. 7 total series wins in 8 years on the greatest franchise in the sport. That is the record. That is the truth. And no comparison to Jokic, no reference to Giannis, and no amount of media cheerleading changes what those numbers say when you read them plainly and honestly. The standard for LeBron James on the Los Angeles Lakers was greatness, and by that standard, by the only standard that actually matters in this conversation, the tenure fell significantly and demonstrably short.